Silent Hill is known as one of the scariest video games ever made. But what if I told you the game's DNA came from a movie that most people have forgotten about? A movie so disturbing that test audiences walked out of the theater because of it. Tonight, we're looking into Jacob's Ladder, the nightmare that inspired Silent Hill. By the time Jacob's Ladder hit theaters in 1990, its director Adrian Lyne was already a big name. He had a reputation for telling raw, unfiltered stories where audiences could see themselves in the characters and feel every ounce of their struggle. In 1983, he gave us Flashdance, introducing Jennifer Beals to the world. 3 years later came 9.5 Weeks, a storm of controversy starring Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger. Then in 1987, the cultural earthquake Fatal Attraction, starring Michael Douglas and Glenn Close. 3 years later, Lyne turned from love and obsession to death and trauma. That's when he made Jacob's Ladder. On the surface, it's about Jacob Singer, a Vietnam veteran played by Tim Robbins, tormented by trauma and hallucinations. But underneath, it's about something far deeper: life, death, and the terrifying void in between. At first, audiences didn't understand it. They went to watch the movie expecting a typical horror thriller, with occasional jump scares, monsters, and suspense. Instead, what they got was a surreal nightmare, a horrifying social commentary on the Vietnam War mixed with biblical references that felt too real, and forced them to look into the darkest and most fragile corners of their mind. The film is unforgettable not just because of its story, but its visuals. Grotesque figures lurking in shadows, hospital corridors lined with screaming patients and twisted bodies, flashbacks to the chaos of Vietnam. And here's the chilling part: none of it was CGI. Take the shaking head demon, for example. Just an actor whipping their head back and forth, filmed with a low shutter speed. Simple, practical, and terrifying. That vivid, unsettling camera work and narrative are among the reasons that made the imagery burn into our brains. It's one of those movies that once you see it, it stays with you. It doesn't feel fake. It feels exactly the opposite, authentic and painfully real. The movie feels like something that you aren't supposed to watch. And it showed with the audience, as many people had the same feeling when they watched the movie. And among them were a few game designers from Japan that were taking notes and already shaping ideas of a different world with similar feeling in their heads. When Konami began developing Silent Hill in the late 1990s, their mission was clear: don't make another Resident Evil. They wanted a slow pacing, psychological tension, a world that lingered with you long after the console was off, and for inspiration, they turned to Jacob's Ladder. The influence is everywhere: the oppressive fog, the faceless, twitching monsters, the hospital settings, the exploration of trauma, guilt, and redemption. All together, once you've seen both, the parallels are impossible to ignore. Silent Hill feels like a spiritual reimagining of Jacob's Ladder. In the game, you're not just fighting monsters to get to the next level. No, you're fighting with the parts of yourself that you don't want to face, only to get closer to the real revelation, and realizing making peace with yourself is the only way of redemption in the end. Silent Hill wasn't just inspired by Jacob's Ladder. It carried its DNA forward into an entirely new medium. The oppressive fog wasn't just a technical trick to hide PlayStation limitations. It became a symbol of uncertainty, of the thin veil between reality and nightmare. The twisted creatures roaming the streets were never random designs. each represented trauma, repression, and the subconscious fears of the character. Just like the grotesque figures in Jacob's Ladder, they weren't monsters of shock value, they were metaphors for the pain people carry. For Jacob's Ladder, what makes the movie so powerful and effective is that the movie isn't about demons or ghosts. At its core, it is about the human mind and its fragile state. It shows the true horrors of war and losing a loved one, and also shows what happens when you've convoluted the mind and have put so much on it to bear that it has broken down. That's the reason both works hit so hard. They don't scare you for cheap thrills, the monsters and jump scares, because those are the symbols of grief, trauma, regret, and that's why they stay with you long after. When Jacob's Ladder released in 1990, it bombed. Made on a $25 million budget, it barely broke even. But over time it found a second life. It became a cult classic, studied in film schools, praised by horror directors, and remembered as a film that dared to look death straight in the eye. And its influence on gaming, you might ask? Undeniable. Without Jacob's Ladder, the survival horror genre might look very different. Silent Hill did the same for video games. At a time when most horror games focused on weapons and enemies, Silent Hill slowed everything down. It trapped players in fog, silence, and their own imagination. And sometimes what you don't see is scarier than anything you do. Without Jacob's Ladder, you probably wouldn't have Silent Hill. And without Silent Hill, you might not have games like Alan Wake, The Evil Within, or even PT. Even movies like The Sixth Sense, The Others, and The Hereditary owe something to the path Jacob's Ladder carved. They all deal with grief, guilt, and the blurred line between reality and delusion, the very themes Silent Hill absorbed into its foundation. That's why Jacob's Ladder and Silent Hill aren't just called classics. They're milestones, pieces of art that dare to ask, what's scarier, the demons outside or the ones that are inside our heads? And that's why decades later people are still talking about both of them. Because nightmares don't fade when the credits roll or when the console powers off. They echo, they linger, and sometimes they wait. They wait for you to close your eyes again. Some nightmares end when you wake up, but others, they follow you into reality.